Imagine a world where the ground beneath your feet feels solid, where the structures you trust stand firm. But what if, beneath that surface, a storm was quietly gathering? A storm that most people have not yet noticed. Companies are collapsing at a speed not seen in years. Former officials are publicly accusing each other of causing long-term damage. And a silent scramble for gold has begun overseas. These signals are small on their own, but together they paint a picture that is far more serious than the headlines suggest. In this video, we dive into 3 powerful developments reshaping the financial landscape. You will learn how these 3 events connect, why they're happening now, and why they matter to every household, business, and investor. You will see the early signs many analysts missed, the hidden patterns behind the headlines, and the economic risks that could grow in the months ahead. By the end of this video, you will understand the forces pushing the United States economy toward instability and the indicators you should watch closely. This video will also highlight lesser-known details that the mainstream news rarely mentions, including the quiet role of high interest rates in pushing firms toward default, the deeper meaning behind Yellen's criticism, and the strategic purpose behind China's rush for gold. When these pieces come together, a clearer and more dramatic picture emerges, one that shows how global power and financial stability may be shifting in real time. So stay with us until the end. The story is larger than a single headline, and every piece matters. There is far more happening beneath the surface than most people realize, and you deserve to see the full picture without noise or confusion. Corporate bankruptcies across the United States are rising at a speed that has not been seen in several years. And the pressure is coming from multiple directions at the same time. High interest rates are hitting companies that borrowed heavily when money was cheap. Now, those loans are rolling over into far more expensive debt, and many firms simply cannot handle the new payment burden. Inflation has also played a major role. Basic costs like fuel, shipping, raw materials, and wages have climbed for years, squeezing profit margins from the inside. Even companies that planned ahead are finding that their operating expenses now rise faster than their revenue. Supply chain issues are another force pushing businesses over the edge. Some firms still struggle to secure the materials they need on time, while others face sudden spikes in transportation delays or import costs. These disruptions do not just slow down production. They create uncertainty and force companies into costly, last-minute solutions. For firms already under financial stress, one unexpected delay can be enough to break the balance. What makes this wave even more alarming is that it is not limited to weak companies. Many firms that were previously stable are now failing. Well-known brands in retail, manufacturing, and consumer goods have begun filing for bankruptcy protection because their business models can no longer survive under current conditions. The sectors being hit hardest are consumer, discretionary, and industrials. Retailers are suffering from lower household spending as people cut back on non-essential purchases. Manufacturers are facing higher borrowing costs and weaker demand from both domestic and international customers. This surge in bankruptcies does not stay inside company boardrooms. It spills over into everyday life. Each closure means lost jobs, slower local economies, fewer small suppliers getting paid, and less business for restaurants, transport companies, and service providers around them. When a major regional employer fails, entire communities are affected. Investors also feel the shock. Retirement accounts, pension funds, and everyday stockholders can see their savings drop when these companies collapse. There is another group adding to the problem, the so-called zombie companies. These are firms that do not truly grow or innovate anymore. They survive only by paying the interest on their debt without ever reducing the principal. When interest rates were low, they could keep going year after year. But now, higher borrowing costs are exposing their weakness. Many of these zombie firms are finally hitting the limit, leading to sudden failures that ripple through the market. The combination of expensive debt, rising costs, unstable supply chains, and years of slow growth has created a fragile environment. Even a small shock can push a company from stability to insolvency. As more firms fall, the risks spread, affecting workers, investors, and communities across the country. Janet Yellen recently delivered one of her strongest critiques yet of the previous administration's approach to China, saying that the United States has been left more vulnerable and more isolated. Her words carry weight because they point to deeper structural problems that extend far beyond politics. She argues that the aggressive tariff war did not strengthen the country as intended. Instead, it raised costs for American companies, disrupted long-term supply chains, and pushed key industries into a weaker position at a time when global competition has only grown tougher. Tariffs were meant to pressure China, but many U.S. firms ended up absorbing those extra costs themselves. Companies that relied on imported components suddenly faced higher expenses, and those costs were often passed on to consumers. At the same time, investment in infrastructure and modern technology did not keep pace with what the economy needed. While other countries built advanced manufacturing hubs and upgraded their digital systems, the United States spent years debating instead of building. Yellen highlights this gap as one of the main reasons the country is struggling to stay competitive in sectors like energy storage, robotics, and semiconductor equipment. She also points out that strained alliances weaken the country's ability to coordinate economic strategy with partners. Policies that distanced the United States from long-standing allies made it harder to form a united front on trade, supply chain security, and technological standards. As a result, other economies created new partnerships and trade routes, while the United States was left on the sidelines of important decisions. This isolation reduces the country's influence over global trade rules and makes it harder for American companies to operate smoothly abroad. These factors connect directly to the growing bankruptcy issue. A weaker global position means U.S. firms face more competition, fewer profitable export opportunities, and higher operating costs. When companies are already struggling with expensive debt, inflation, and supply chain instability, the added burden of lost international advantage pushes them closer to financial distress. Firms that once relied on global markets to stabilize their revenue are now more exposed to sudden drops in demand or increased foreign competition. This vulnerability spreads through multiple industries, from manufacturing to retail. Businesses that depend on imported materials feel the weight of tariffs. Companies that once benefited from global cooperation now confront rising costs and shrinking margins. Even firms that operate only inside the United States feel the impact, because global weakness often translates into higher prices, slower consumer spending, and decreased investor confidence. In this environment, every shock hits harder. A single delay, a supply shortage, or a shift in currency values can push a struggling company toward insolvency. Yellen's comments highlight how strategic missteps from the past created a landscape where American firms face more pressure, less support, and greater exposure to global disruptions. Gold prices have climbed to record highs once again. And the momentum behind this surge is coming from several powerful forces moving at the same time. Global uncertainty has increased as markets face rising geopolitical tension, slower economic growth, and unpredictable policy shifts. In moments like these, investors and central banks look for stability, and gold becomes the preferred safe asset. This time, however, the strongest push is coming from central bank demand, with China standing out as one of the most aggressive buyers. China has been increasing its gold reserves for months, adding significant amounts to its holdings while reducing exposure to U.S. Treasury debt. This pattern sends a clear signal to markets. When a major economic power shifts heavily toward gold, traders interpret it as preparation for potential financial instability or future currency risk. Central banks in other regions have also joined the trend, expanding their gold holdings to shield themselves from volatile exchange rates and global financial pressure. Their actions amplify the sense of uncertainty, driving individual investors to follow the same path. When investors see large-scale gold buying, especially from governments, it triggers concern. Gold is used as a safe haven asset because it does not rely on the performance of any single currency or financial system. Heavy demand often means that those closest to economic data believe something may be weakening beneath the surface. It could be the value of major currencies, the reliability of government bonds, or the long-term strength of global financial structures. The psychology is simple. If central banks are preparing for risk, everyday investors feel they must do the same. This movement has deep implications for the United States, especially considering its growing debt levels and rising interest payments. As more overseas powers shift their reserves toward gold and away from the dollar, it hints at declining confidence in the long-term stability of U.S. currency and debt. The United States has long benefited from the dollar's status as the world's most trusted reserve asset. But increasing gold accumulation abroad suggests that some countries are preparing for a future where the dollar may not dominate to the same degree. A shift in reserve strategy affects more than just symbolic influence. If fewer countries want to hold U.S. debt, the cost of borrowing can rise, putting more pressure on the federal budget. This comes at a time when national debt is already reaching historic highs, and interest payments are consuming a larger share of government revenue. A weaker global appetite for dollars and U.S. bonds could slowly reshape financial markets, making it harder for the United States to sustain its current economic model. The rising gold demand also reflects deeper concerns about inflation, currency devaluation, and the long-term strength of global trade systems. When the world prepares for financial stress, gold becomes a signal of shifting power and changing expectations. For the United States, watching other nations pivot toward gold is a warning that confidence in the dollar may not be as unshakable as it once seemed. When all these developments are placed side by side, a larger pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The rise in bankruptcies shows how fragile the domestic economy has become. Companies that once seemed stable are now struggling to survive under the weight of higher borrowing costs, inflation, and inconsistent demand. This weakness. Did the cancel China plan just backfire in a way almost no one saw coming? Because right now, the story that was supposed to strengthen America is starting to show cracks, and the people who pushed it are struggling to explain what is happening behind the scenes. Today, we are looking at a narrative that looked powerful on the surface, but is now collapsing under its own weight. And the deeper you go, the more hidden pieces you find. In this video, you will learn how Scott Bessent's bold claims are falling apart, why the United States is quietly covering up major job market problems, and how rising pressure is sending shockwaves through American tech stocks. You will see how all these events connect, forming a much bigger story that most people never notice because it does not reach the headlines. There is a side of this crisis that analysts rarely talk about, and by the time we reach the end, you will understand the risks that are building right now across the American economy. This is not just about politics. It is not just about China. It is about a chain reaction that starts with a single claim, spreads into trade policy, hits American workers, and finally spills into the stock market. We are going to break it all down step by step with simple words and clear explanations so you can follow exactly what went wrong, who is getting hurt, and what could happen next. If the pressure keeps rising, you will hear why the job numbers that are supposed to show strength are far more fragile than they look. You will see how decoupling from China has created problems that no one prepared for. You will understand why certain technology companies are suddenly struggling, even though the economy is supposed to be stable. And you will learn about the quiet warnings coming from inside financial circles that hint at deeper instability. The reason to stay until the end is simple. The final part of this video will show you the full picture. It will bring together the hidden job losses, the collapsing political narrative, the fall in tech stocks, and the risks that experts will not openly discuss yet. By the end, you will be able to see the pattern that links all of these events, and you will understand why many insiders believe the next few months could be far more unpredictable than anyone expects. If you want to know what is really happening behind the curtain, this video will take you there. So get ready, because we are about to uncover a story that powerful people wish would stay quiet. Welcome to our channel, and if you want more deep, clear, and real explanations like this one, make sure to subscribe. The phrase "cancel China" refers to a growing push inside the United States to break away from China's economic influence. It includes new tariffs, restrictions on technology exports, limits on investment, and a wider effort to pull supply chains out of China. Supporters of this approach argue that the United States must protect itself from China's rise in manufacturing, electronics, and advanced technology. The message is simple on the surface: reduce dependence on China and rebuild American strength. But underneath that message are ideas, claims, and warnings that help fuel this movement. One of the loudest voices behind this push is Scott Bessent. He has repeatedly warned that China's rise has damaged the American workforce. One of his most talked about claims is that the United States lost 3.7 million jobs because of trade with China, a number that has been used widely in debates about tariffs, reshoring, and industrial policy. His message suggests that China's manufacturing boom came directly at the expense of American workers, turning trade into a threat rather than an opportunity. These claims gained attention because they fit the public frustration over factories closing and industries shrinking. Even though economists continue to argue over the real scale of those losses, statements like Bessent's shaped how many policymakers view China today. Because of these warnings, the narrative around China shifted fast. It became a talking point in speeches, campaigns, and economic plans. It helped justify new tariffs on Chinese goods, new barriers to Chinese technology companies, and a bigger push to build more American factories. It also influenced rules targeting Chinese influence in sectors like chips, rare earth minerals, energy storage, and electric vehicles. The "cancel China" idea turned into more than a phrase. It became the emotional fuel behind major changes in trade policy and technology strategy. This movement grew even stronger as it entered public discourse. Concerns about national security mixed with concerns about jobs. Tech decoupling became part of the story, with the United States trying to limit China's access to advanced chips and artificial intelligence. Companies began moving supply chains to other countries, not just for cost reasons, but to avoid political risk. At the same time, China responded with its own countermeasures, which added more pressure to global markets. The story became bigger than one person's claims. It became a framework that shaped how politicians, investors, and companies behave. By understanding what "cancel China" really means and how strong voices like Scott Bessent helped push it forward, you can see why it has become such a powerful force in shaping current economic decisions and why it continues to influence policies that reach deep into technology, trade, and the American job market. Scott Bessent's warning about 3.7 million American jobs lost to China sounds dramatic, and that is why it spread so quickly. But when researchers looked closely at the numbers, the picture turned out to be very different. Several economic studies, including work highlighted by the Civotus Institute, showed that the real job losses linked directly to China are likely far smaller. Some estimates suggest the true figure may be overstated by 2 to 4 times. That means the actual number could be closer to 1 million or even less when separating normal economic shifts from the specific impact of imports from China. This does not erase the pain felt in many factory towns, but it shows that the story is more complicated than a single headline suggests. Manufacturing job losses in the United States have been happening for decades, long before China became a major trading partner. Automation played a huge role as machines began to replace repetitive factory work. American companies also moved operations to other countries, such as Mexico, Vietnam, and Malaysia, not just China. Consumer preferences changed, supply chains expanded overseas, and industries reorganized. When you put these factors together, you see a long-term decline shaped by technology, management decisions, and global competition, not only by Chinese imports. The Savotis Institute emphasizes this trend, showing that a broad mix of forces contributed to the shrinking manufacturing workforce. At the same time, there is a growing idea of a hidden jobs crash inside the United States. This does not mean a sudden collapse, but rather a slow and quiet erosion happening underneath the official numbers. Companies are laying off workers in small waves instead of big announcements. Some are cutting full-time positions and replacing them with contractors. Others are moving employees into different roles that get counted differently in government data. Workers who lose stable jobs often shift into lower-paying service work or short-term gigs, which keeps unemployment numbers low but masks the real economic hit. This creates the appearance of a strong job market even when the quality of work is falling. The word hidden does not imply a conspiracy. It points to gaps in the way employment is tracked. A job may still count as a job even if the pay is lower, the hours are unstable, or the person moved from skilled work into basic service roles. Many Americans are picking up gig work to fill financial gaps. These gig jobs do not always show up clearly in labor statistics. There are also mislabeled roles, temporary jobs treated as permanent, and part-time workers counted alongside full-time employees. All of these details blend together, making the job market appear healthier than the reality many families experience. Understanding these layers helps reveal how the narrative around the 3.7 million jobs grew strong, even though the underlying data tells a different story. The cancel China narrative that once sounded clear and forceful is now meeting growing resistance. As more economists revisit the evidence, they are finding that the impact of China on American jobs and industries may have been far smaller than the loudest claims suggested. Research highlighted by groups such as the American Enterprise Institute shows that the numbers behind the China shock were often stretched to support political arguments. Many of the losses blamed on Chinese imports can be traced to automation, business consolidation, and long-term structural changes in manufacturing. This new wave of data is creating pushback, raising doubts about whether the aggressive decoupling strategy has been built on a shaky foundation. These doubts are spreading into the financial world, where investors watch every sign of tension between the United States and China. Markets react not only to economic fundamentals, but also to political signals. Recently, rising export controls on advanced chips, restrictions on high-tech equipment, and China's own moves to tighten control over rare earth materials have increased uncertainty. Reports have shown that these tensions are keeping investors uneasy, with market reactions reflecting fear of supply chain disruptions and profit risks. When two of the world's largest economies clash in technology and resources, traders expect more volatility, and that fear can spread quickly through global markets. As these pressures build, the meaning of a collapse becomes clearer from an economic perspective. It does not mean that policies disappear overnight. It means that the arguments used to support rapid decoupling are losing weight. When the evidence shows weaker job impacts than advertised, the political case becomes harder to defend. When companies face higher costs from relocating production, the promised benefits look smaller. When tech restrictions spark retaliation, the economic upside becomes uncertain. Many businesses that once supported a strong break from China are now calculating the financial risks of moving too fast. Behind the scenes, more companies are signaling discomfort with aggressive decoupling because the expected gains are not matching the realities they face on the ground. Supply chains that took decades to build cannot be replaced in a few years without major cost increases. And these costs eventually fall on American consumers. Some firms are quietly slowing their China exit plans, exploring hybrid strategies instead of full withdrawal. Investors see the shift, and it adds another layer of pressure to a narrative that once seemed unstoppable. The pressure created by the cancel China narrative does not stay inside policy debates. It moves directly into the stock market. And the first sector to feel the impact is technology. When tensions rise between the United States and China, investors immediately worry about supply chains.